Or you said eliminating is impossible. Is that correct?
I think it is. I think it is that we're going to continue to see accidents in this sport, but the question is, are the accidents going to be the weird, anomalous, whoa, I didn't think of that? Or is it going to be, oh, no, it's that one again? So those are the ones that bug me,
so,
where we've seen it so many times before.
So now then, that kind of leads us to one of the big questions and debates. Let's see, Ian Ball kind of touches on this a little bit. He says, is this isolated to high-speed performance landings, or is there no real pattern to this? And a lot of the debate that I've heard both online and around the drop zone is that it's a swooper problem, that they're causing this problem, and the swoopers are saying that's not fair. What's your thoughts on that whole angle?
Yeah. Well, of course, I do both, right? I swoop and I go slow sometimes, and I find that if I'm setting up for a swoop, I'm flying a downwind and a base and basically an aggressive final. If I'm not doing a swoop, I'm flying a downwind and a base and not as aggressive final. So the truth of the matter is that as long as I'm not doing a reversal, and so when I say reversal, everybody's flying a left-hand traffic pattern, and like a good boy, I fly a left-hand traffic pattern right along with them, but then I'm a little higher because I'm setting up for a 270, and I get to that A point, that turn to final, but I turn the opposite direction to everybody else. At that moment, I am now turning into my blind spot, and it'll be awfully hard for me to see somebody back there, especially if I'm trying to set it up just right where I swoop exactly where I want to. There's a bit of intense focus going on, which means I'm excluding a few of the unconsidered possibilities. So my answer to this, and I'm not the only one that believes this is so, is that if you are going to be swooping in the general vicinity of other people who are not swooping, number one, they have right of way, right? If you're going faster than they are, you definitely don't have the right to cut them off.
And overtaking them from above.
And overtaking from above and behind, right? So that scares people to think, oh my gosh, there could be somebody coming to get me. But if I fly the opposite pattern, assuming I'm going to do a 270 or even a 630, if I do a mirror image pattern, so in the context of everybody else doing left-hand traffic, I do right-hand traffic, I can see them all coming on my base leg, even on my downwind leg. I can scan traffic, and then as soon as I start into my turn, just a few degrees into it, I'm already going with the flow in terms of my direction, and so my rate of closure on another canopy is going to be much less than if I'm flying the same pattern and then doing the opposite turn to everybody else.
But isn't the problem with that now is that now we've got people flying on both sides of the pattern. We've got people in conventional traffic flying a left pattern, and 4 or 5 swoopers on the other side flying a right pattern. Now it seems to me that just takes all predictability and makes it very difficult to distinguish, especially for a newer jumper, what's going on and what to expect, because there's people coming from every direction now.
Yeah, and I think that the answer there is to take actually 2 steps further towards safety by, number one, having a line of death, a line that you cannot cross either side of the line. If you're doing a conservative, boxy approach, you stay on that side of the line. That's right down the middle of the landing area. And, of course, the best way to do that is to have some sort of a target on that side for people to sort of, to know the distinction. And then you have a swoop course of some kind, even if a spray-painted line on the field. And to take that even further, the other step I find helps is to have the finish point where people actually end up stopping their landing and their parachute hits the ground, having those in line more or less. And what that does is it forces the entry gate further back, right, further downwind. And so now when the swoopers are coming in and if you can imagine the zone just downwind of the entry gate is the dive zone, right? So that's where people's parachutes are pointed at the ground. It's kind of like a tornado, and you want to stay away from there if you're not swooping. But if you're coming in hot, you just know that that's the area where people are going to be pointed towards the ground. If that zone is offset downwind, even if somebody flying a traditional pattern is forced because of pattern error to extend their base leg over towards the line of death, even if they went over the top of the swoop course, they're going to be at 300 or 400 feet above the ground, whereas the swoopers, provided that they've flown a reasonably good approach, are going to be down below 50 feet, flying down the swoop course. So there's really no conflict there.
So I think you wrote about this what was it, about 4 years ago, that we had kind of a rash of similar incidents. And I believe that was when you kind of first came up with this concept. What you call it, the Great Wall, is that right?
Right.
So
it evolved into the line of death, the Great Wall was the original.
The line of death is a much better name.
It is definitely more intense. Yeah.
Have you seen that adopted anywhere? Like, or dropped?
Oh, yeah.
Because I've not really seen that in place. I've only heard it talked about in theory.
Oh, sure. Yeah, lots of drop zones doing it. And, I mean, even if all they're doing is saying, here's where the swoopers go, and here's where everybody else goes, I think that alone is in many cases sufficient. And the distances don't have to be massive if we've thought it just a few hundred. Enough. Obviously, the more, the better.
I'm sorry, Brian. I'm gonna have to just ask you to repeat those distances again. Got just a little bit of dropout again.
Well, I was just saying, just a couple 100 feet is usually sufficient. 200 to 500 feet, somewhere in that range, is acceptable in most cases. There are going to be anomalies. There's going to be people that fly a completely funky pattern, and you don't know where they're going to be. But that's why on the downwind leg, everybody, regardless of what you're doing, needs to be scanning for traffic. That's your opportunity. As you come into the zone and you're well above it, you scan up and down and all around and look for the reasons not to do the swoop.
So that assumes a lot of discipline on the swooper's part. And obviously the safe canopy pilots are going to do that, but I think we've probably both seen many times when somebody should have aborted a high-performance turn and didn't.
Yeah.
So then now how do you deal with that? How do you tell that person, hey, you really shouldn't have done that, when their answer is going to be, well, that guy cut me off?
Yeah, the blame game. You got to love the blame game. Well, blaming other people is always going to show up in this sport, because it feels better to blame somebody else than it is to take responsibility for your own errors. However, some accountability, some consequences. Grounding is the extreme. You say, sorry, you're done for the day, go get a beer, which may not be negative reinforcement for some. But my drinking club has a skydiving problem, right? But in most cases, simply a little gentle awareness, you're drawing to this, where you say, hey, listen, you kind of cut across this guy, and but as you do it, you make sure there's other people around. I find that public humiliation is a very powerful tool in this sport. It's kept me alive for many years.
Cameron Davey, he asks, if your DZ has one main landing area, should people be swooping in where everyone else of mixed skill and experience is landing? So that kind of plays into what we are talking about right now.
Yeah, you just know when to say no. I guess the question is, we're kind of pointing the fingers at the swoopers here, and they're not the only problem. But if you are a swooper, you really need to separate your current performance on this specific jump with your self-esteem. Because people get so hooked on, I got to do the swoop right, and if I don't do it right, I'm going to hate myself until I go up again and fix it. And that is a very dangerous state of mind, and it's more prevalent than we realize. That people they weigh this current performance very heavily, and they get pretty beat. They beat on themselves if they don't do it right. You need to reinforce when you abort. You need to pat yourself on the back and say, hey, I'm an adult now. I just made a really good pilot decision. Just like when somebody decides not to stand up a bad landing and they execute a PLF, a really nice one, there should be a big refrigerator on every drop zone where you put gold stars, next to their name, because they executed a good PLF, right? The definition of a good landing is not a stand-up. It's a soft touchdown on the planet, whether you stand up or not. So I think it's the same thing. Part of being a swooper is not swooping when it's inappropriate.
Yeah. One last question from Facebook, and then we're through all of those. Russ Haas, he says, can you review collision avoidance procedures and then maybe discuss a little bit about what to do if you do find yourself in a wrap for any reason?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, in aviation, we have our standard procedure, turn to the right. Right? Like, Maverick, brake right. So that's a helpful thing unless it's shorter to turn left. So when in doubt, avoid them in whatever just sort of feels right at the time. But if it's a head-on, if you both turn right, within just a few degrees, you've already avoided that potential collision. And that's really what we need to focus our attention on, is that we are very powerful in our ability to create separation from other canopies. All it requires is the awareness that they're there. So scanning all the time, always, as Jay says, staying vigilant, but at the same time, knowing what to do. So when a collision is imminent, and there is some debate about what is the correct procedure here. Do you spread out, ball up? And I'm not going to pretend to be a crew dog. Most crew dogs will say spread out, bounce off the lines, right? And hopefully that'll avoid an entanglement altogether. If I'm going into somebody with 300-pound HMA lines, I don't know that I want to spread out. If I knew that I was going into a canopy with really skinny lines and it was really high rate of closure, I'm going to ball up. I'm going to get small and shoot out the other side and create an entanglement that I can cut away from, whereas spreading out is going to slice off my arms and legs, and then I won't have any limbs to pull my handles with. I know that's gross, but it's true.
The other issue that comes to my mind talking about this is I think most of these collisions that have happened recently have been at an altitude where I don't know if there's much that you can do. You get into a collision at 300 or 400 feet. That's
yeah. How do you avoid it? It's another one. Function down. What do I do? How did you get there? Right. That's really the only answer to give a student when they ask that question. Don't be there. So how do we avoid that? That's the question we need to be focusing on. Flying predictable patterns, having our whole brain active by relaxing ourselves enough that we can actually see what's in front of us. Just because our eyes are pointed at it doesn't mean our brain is actually processing the information. So this is where the slowing down, maybe even putting the canopy into brakes after opening, looking around and taking everything in and getting a good sense. And as things sort of progress, as you descend, noticing how it's evolving. We can't necessarily count all 22 canopies when we're jumping out of an otter, or all 196 when we jump out of a C-130, but you can look for the ones that are near you, and it'll remain consistent most of the time. But you don't have people showing up out of nowhere. They jumped out of the same plane as you in most cases. So keep your eyes open.
Well, Brian, as always, just excellent conversation. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about this topic. I think we ought to talk about where we can read more about you.
Yeah, well, you can go to bigairsports.com. Lots of articles. Of course, it's sports with a Z, and briangermain.com. So we have to use the new tagline now, right?
What was it? You just told it to me today. What did you?
We just came up with it last night. Safety is no accident.
Safety is no accident. I like it.
Yeah, there it is. That works.
Brian, thanks so much for your time, and we'll talk to you real soon.
Right on. It is a great pleasure, Dave. Thank you so much for having me. Fly safe.